Bust, a common term we hear in sports. Sports has become the ultimate form of binary outcomes. There can only be winners and losers. Many times we use media to help us define expectations of what someone should accomplish in their given field. Someone is the number one pick in the draft, so they must be a franchise player, right? But have you thought of it this way? Yo, guys, welcome to the first episode of the But Have You Thought of It This Way podcast. I'm your host, BTR, B So the Rebel. First of all, I want you guys to understand, man, what I do is for the sake of enlightenment, it's for the sake of education, it's for the sake of entertainment. Everything is about becoming better, bigger and better, the best version of yourself. So let's jump right into it. When we're talking about expectation and we're talking about the concept of what is a bust, the bust in the NBA, the NFL, we hear these terms all the time and we throw them around. Hell, I probably throw them around sometimes. We always think about who is the biggest bust of all time? You know, who is the biggest person? Who is the person that had the biggest expectation and failed the most, right? And that concept is a very interesting concept because of the simple fact that we typically don't place those expectations on ourselves. There's a myriad of players who have, according to media, according to fans, according to maybe even themselves, had failed expectations. Now let's delve into why, not necessarily why they failed, but why do we place such a strong blame on them in the sense of how harsh we are, right? We don't just admire the struggle in the sense of I tried to climb Mount Everest, but I failed. It's more of the, look at this guy, look what everyone else did, and look what you did. And we say these things a lot of times. I think it's kind of like that concept of being harsher on someone else than you are on your own self. So if you were to try to accomplish something and fail, you would say to yourself, maybe to give yourself some type of solace to get over it, you'd say, well, at least I tried. But when you look at an NBA player or you look at an NFL player, try to accomplish something and fail, or don't necessarily fail, but don't necessarily exceed or meet expectations. A lot of times it's, this guy's lazy, he's soft. There's all these different adjectives and all these different descriptions on the man's character, right? Or in the woman's character, whatever the case may be. Now, I got a few names I'm thinking about when I think about the term bust, right? I think about Kwame Brown, right? You think about like a Greg Oden. You think about these guys, and both of those guys have two different concepts or two different aspects of why they necessarily didn't succeed at the level that many maybe have predicted that they would, or just many that hoped that they would, or just what the first overall pick entails, right? And that's interesting because when you think about like a Kwame Brown and you say, okay, this dude was probably in the league for about 12 years and he was a starter for maybe half of those seasons and maybe 5 or 6 years as a starter, and then the rest as a bench guy who got relative. He got a lot, he played in the game. He probably 15, 20 minutes per night towards the end of his career, and at the height of his career, maybe 30 minutes a game, and maybe 10 points and 7 boards or something like that. And when you think about that, it's like, okay, that's not a bad guy, right? It's not a bad career. But when you think about the simple fact that he is the first pick in the draft, you think about what is these expectations and what is it about that, right? And there's a lot of people that have become famous for even joking on this guy, right? Like Stephen A. Smith. Not to say that he's solely famous for joking on Kwame Brown, but the simple fact of the matter is the whole Kwame Brown, the Slava Medvedenko, that whole concept of I'm going to joke on this guy's name because this guy's trash, you know what I mean? And I'm going to, basically what he's saying is there's a myriad of players in the NBA who have similar expectations and they've met them. And he's saying, well, you didn't meet them, right? And that's the thing about media too, right? Is that, and shout out to my big bro, Corey, for even bringing that up in the comment section of my previous video when I even announced that this podcast was going to start. And he was talking about, he wants me to talk about the media. So big bro, this one's for you in terms of how I wanted to mesh those two things together. When you're talking about the media controls a lot of times our expectations. They control our expectations on a myriad of things, on a whole lot of things. And if you're talking about sports, if they say that this guy is the first pick in the draft, and this is what this means, right? This means he's a franchise player. this means he's this. And then there's different expectations because not every first overall pick is the same. Because Kwame Brown, as good as he was, it didn't have the same expectations as LeBron James, right? LeBron could have came in NBA and he could have averaged 19 points a game for the majority of his career. And he could have played 15, 20 seasons and been like a 3 or 4 time All-Star. And we'd have been like, what the hell was that? I thought this guy was the next Jordan. And that's a big thing too, is that sometimes we hear things, especially if it's regurgitated over and over and over. We hear it happens in music. How many of us have heard a song in music that we didn't necessarily like, but it just kept getting spins on the radio over and over and over. So we just start to like it, or at least we start to memorize it. And when we talk about this concept of who's overrated and who's underrated, the media, they basically drive that narrative, right? They like when you're talking about, okay, this is like people come up to me and say, well, is so-and-so overrated? Is Damian Lillard, is he underrated? Is he overrated? I'm like, well, it depends on who you're asking. I mean, if you're asking ESPN, I don't know. I mean, maybe if they call him a top 3 player, and if he's underrated, well, what does that mean? And all of these different aspects of what that means. And if you're not this, then you don't even deserve any type of respect. And that's very interesting, right? Because the reality is 99% of the world, these are no stats by any means. I've done no polls. I've done no research with this. But I'm pretty sure a big percentage of the world is not necessarily what you would deem as successful. And what I mean by successful, I mean in a desirable position. And that's myself included. I don't consider myself in a desirable position from the standpoint of reaching that ultimate potential. Now, remember, everything is always perspective. To the homeless man, I am in a desirable position. To the man with different disabilities, I'm in a desirable position. But for the sake of this context, I'm talking about reaching full potential. And I think that when you're talking about like a guy like a Kwame Brown, the concept of he's a bust is and being that harsh. Once again, that's I think is the concept is that's the toughest part about it. Is that we're harsh on him, right? He's a bum, he's trash, he's this, he's that. And there's all of these words that if you failed at something that you would not apply to yourself. And why is that the case? And like I said before, it's that simple mindset of anything to give myself some type of solace, right? Anything to give myself this type of mindset of I want to feel better about myself by putting this guy down. And you see it happen all the time like that. The NBA, or sports in general, it feeds into our emotions, our basic instincts in terms of I'm picking a side, right? And sometimes you pick a side based on the side you don't like, not necessarily the side you do like. We see that in boxing, where Mayweather, who is the all-time pay-per-view king in terms of what he can generate to the sport, many of his pay-per-view buys came from people that wanted to see him lose. Many of the cheers for the opposition, like when you're talking about him facing like a guy like a Roberto Guerrero or a young Canelo, many of those cheers don't necessarily come from that they're Guerrero fans or that they're Canelo fans, they're Mosley fans. Not to say that those guys don't have fans, because they're big stars in their own right. But what I'm saying is many of those cheers come from the simple fact that they just hate Mayweather, right? So that concept of I'm going to pick a side, and I'm going to view that side with enough, I would say, with enough angst to really piss me off to the point where I'm going to click this buy button, right? And that's an interesting concept. But when you think about how do you treat yourself when you fail, I mean, no one is that harsh. We call athletes bums. We call them, bitches, and we call them all these different things. Like, how many times do you hear someone say, well, Kevin Durant's a bitch, or DeMarcus Cousins is stupid, he's this, he's trash, he's all these crazy names. And it's like, on a real level, would you say it in their face, right? And that's not to say that you're soft or you're anything, but the concept is, for one, who's walking around that rude? I don't typically meet people that rude. That's a social media thing, right? Where you get this anonymity about yourself and you feel like, I'm never gonna meet these guys in the first place. Why respect them, right? And you see it happen, like I said before, in boxing, when Mayweather fights and they say he's a chicken. The fact of the matter is stepping into the boxing ring automatically would strip that away. But this is where perspective comes in, right? Because Mayweather is not as quote unquote brave as Arturo Gatti. What that means is he's not as gung-ho about the rock'em sock'em robot aspect of the boxing match, right? So when you're fighting a Mayweather, watching Mayweather fight, it's like, okay, I got to understand this guy's not Mike Tyson. And he's not just going to press forward regardless. And the simple fact is I'm going to have to watch this guy apply his craft. He's going to apply it in such a subtle way. There's going to be subtle movements in terms of the way he's going to pivot, the shoulder roll, parrying, all these different things, counter punches, all of that. And it's going to be, jabs to the body. It's going to be so subtle to the point where it can bore you to death, right? If you don't really have an appreciation for that style. Whereas I think like an Arturo Gatti, that translates. Just watching two guys fight. I think just watching two guys fight, not necessarily think about the science of it, is funner. Because heck, if you're walking down the street and you see two guys fight and you're watching them fight, and then all of a sudden one dude's like throwing feints, right? Like he's throwing feints and he's bobbing his head and he's like feinting to the body. He's doing all these technique stuff. You're like, okay, I might leave because I was expecting these two guys to run each other over. And then conversely, if you see another dude, you walk down the other street or other side of the street, if you see that there's someone who, other two people are fighting and they're just going crazy, like tackling each other and just, running. It's kind of like that, that Peter Griffin, fight when he's fighting the chicken, like they're fighting like that. It's like that translates across the board. I don't need an appreciation to enjoy that. And that is an interesting thing too, is like, not necessarily the fighting aspect, but the expectation, right, of what that means, right? Everyone has different expectations. And we have to also understand that expectations doesn't always equate to a different level, right? It's just what you expect. You walk into a room, you may expect people to say hi to you. I may expect people to leave me alone. The next person may expect a certain person to say hi, but the other half of the room leave them alone. And that's not a question of what is a better reaction when you walk in a room. That's more of a question of what do you prefer? Because sometimes that's also plays into our expectation of it's a preference. It's just it's a personal preference. Like if we're going back to sports, I have people may say I have a preference that if you're the number one pick in the draft, you act like the number one pick in the draft. There's a certain kind of expectation of how a quarterback should act in the NFL, right? And they should be more, diplomatic. They should be that, have that, they should almost be gentlemen, right? They should be very articulate, easy to understand. They should be these type of people that are easygoing, right? They don't really ruffle feathers. The only feathers that they would ruffle in the sense of anything is their teammates, but that's for the sake of motivation, not in the sense of agitation. And that's when we're talking about like a preference and how that intertwines with our expectations. And this is a term that I've coined. I don't know if anyone else has ever said it, but I've always said expectation creates elevation, meaning that the expectation, your expectation of someone, it determines how high you elevate them. And if the expectation is low, then it's easy to elevate that person. It's a good example, in my opinion. When you're talking about Dwight Howard, I think that name in the NBA circles, from fans to media, that is a controversial name, right? That's a polarizing name. Not just because of his play, but it's because of this expectation of what he was supposed to be. And what that entails. I think that Dwight Howard, and from my personal view, I think he's Hall of Fame bound. He should be Hall of Fame bound. I don't have a vote, but for what it's worth, I feel he's a Hall of Famer. But I understand the sentiment of this dude has otherworldly ability, and for whatever reason, he has morphed into a solid slightly more than solid NBA player, right? When in my opinion, he was a star player for a myriad of years, and he was a perennial all-star. And then for whatever reason, that fell out, the back injury, whatever. But it's like he wasn't Shaq. And I think that when people see you or see this guy, they're like, if I had his ability, I would do X, Y, and Z. And that's a very interesting thing, because that's, you run into people who talk like that, right? Who say that if I was this, if I was 6'5", if I was this, I would be that. The fact of the matter is, from a biological standpoint, a psychological standpoint, environmental standpoint, we all have crazy advantages that we never think about. And there's advantages to having both your parents in the household. There's advantages to being over 6 foot. There's advantages to being under 6 foot. There's advantages to having a naturally high IQ. There's advantages to having a dad or a mom who's in a amazing space financially, and or there's an advantage to having a certain teacher. Maybe you went to a school that I couldn't go to, or maybe you went to a school that was just better in terms of what it was trying to teach its kids, and thus that affected your classmates, thus that affected your friends, and it affected your friendships and what you motivate each other to do, because that's a big part of how you succeed and why you fail too, right? Is that you have friends who motivate you, and sometimes they deter you, they make things tougher, whether intentionally or unintentionally. They make life tougher or easier, and that's what you talk about. But going back to Dwight Howard, is this expectation of he should be 25-15 or 30-15. Shaq. I think Shaq always says like 28-14 or something like that. And my thing is, if everyone who was 28-14, we wouldn't appreciate Shaq, right? And that's an interesting thing too, is like, why do you want everyone to be that way? And I get it. Like I said, I understand that they feel like Dwight Howard should be a certain way. But here's another guy, DeAndre Jordan. DeAndre Jordan and Dwight Howard at this point in the game are very similar players, right? Putting up similar numbers, same stats, and they got the same duty, right? The same duty is to put backs, be the best rebounder on the team, and be the rim protector on the team. And you don't really hear people say, like, even for as bad as DeAndre Jordan is on the free throw line, even for his lack of post moves, no one's going to call him a bust, right? No one's going to say, and like I said, no, I'm not to say that people are calling Dwight Howard a bust, but they are calling him a disappointment, that there was more there, that he didn't get the most out of his natural abilities. And that's very interesting, because in my opinion, DeAndre Jordan is one of the most athletic centers of all time. But because he didn't reach those heights of Dwight Howard, I think the expectation was he's doing damn good, right? He's 14 points, 15 rebounds, or whatever the case, and it's perfectly fine. Whereas Dwight Howard going out there and doing that is like I can recall watching an episode of Undisputed, and I think Dwight Howard, I think it was last season, Dwight Howard had like 30 points and 30 rebounds. And they were like, instead of like going crazy over the performance, they were more so saying, is this what he could have been? He could have been the guy that had 30 rebounds and 30 points. Like, no, he's not Wilt Chamberlain. Like, everybody ain't doing that. Especially in today's game, everyone's, no one's, I don't know if anyone's going to average 30 rebounds. But I get the sentiment, right? Not to be so cynical and literal. They're not saying that, but they were saying that he should have been very dominant. And I'm like, you know what? The dude still is damn good. Like I said, my opinion, probably in the Hall of Fame, 7-8-time All-Star, 5-time All-Make First Team, 3 or 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. Those are nothing to sneeze at. There can only be one Defensive Player of the Year per season, and he was that, I'm pretty sure, 3 years in a row. And that's a hell of an accomplishment. And I think when we're talking about expectations, sometimes, like I said, we're harsher on people. Now, for the last segment of this podcast, what I really want to discuss now is how to place expectations on ourselves without being overwhelmed, right? Maintaining the harshness of, I need to accomplish this goal, right? That is an interesting concept of how can I maintain this focus of, I need to be successful. Make no mistake about it, I'm coming here to be successful. But I somehow have to understand at the same point that there is a chance, there's a slight chance, like I said, and you want to make it slight from a mental standpoint. You want to say that it's a slight chance that I'm going to fail, because that's just how life is. Life isn't always fair. But like I said, make no mistake about it. I'm coming in here to be successful. I'm not coming in here to be in second place. And then at the same token, you have to say, okay, how can I accept these results, right? And I think the big deal is to become process oriented, right? And that is to say, give your chance give yourself the ultimate chance to succeed. And you don't want to question the process if you fail, if you don't get the given result. Meaning that if you go out there and you study, and say you got a big test coming up and it's finals week, and you don't even study at all, and you get a C, the first thing you're going to do is go back to all those times you were playing video games, all those times you were playing Call of Duty, all those times you stayed up and played Fortnite, right? And you're like, damn, I could have been studying. I could have been studying instead of doing all this crazy stuff. And so you're going to go right back to the process of it. Shout out to Joel Embiid. You're going to speak right to that process of what you could have done better. Now, if there's a situation where you get a C or you get a B and you were shooting for an A because maybe there's a program you want to get into, or maybe you're just the kind of person that wants a 4.0, and say you do study 3-4 hours a night, for the semester or the duration of when the assignment or the test was told it was going to be. So maybe you studied 4 or 5 hours a day, and you got yourself in what you thought was just you were ready, right? You were fully prepared, mentally prepared, and you thought it was this, and you just failed. I think those results you'll accept a lot better, right? Those are the things that don't hinder you when you take the next test. But I think that concept of you got to understand there's certain habits that you make, and then you start to identify with those habits. And you start saying, well, I'm not a morning person, right? I'm not the kind of person that wakes up, that likes waking up in the morning. And I used to say that, right? I used to say, for example, me and my girl, we wake up and we meditate together, right? Now, we meditate about 5:45 in the morning. After that, we work out. And I used to say, man, I would never do that. Not even just the meditation aspect, but I would never wake up that damn early just to freaking workout, and I love working out, but I wouldn't do it. I used to tell my why would you wake up that early to do it? And I remember being in middle school and more, being on the basketball team and saying, man, I should probably wake up before school starts, because I remember watching a Sebastian Telfair documentary called Through the Fire, and he was waking up before school and he's working out and all these different things. I said, I think I should try that out. And I was like, and then I would oversleep, or some days I would do it, but I might do it once a week, twice a week. And I would be like, man, I'm just not a morning person. And when you fail enough, more so when you fail in the process, you start to identify with that, right? And that's not an intentional thing. It's more of it's a subtle thing. It's not intentional. It's not that you just say, I'm this, right? But it's more of you start to understand your own patterns, right? Certain habits you make, you start to identify with. I'm this kind of person. I'm a night person. I'm a this person. I'm a that person. When you want a result, you have to make a sacrifice, right? You have to say that this is what I want, right? And there's an expectation here I'm going to place on myself, not necessarily to get the desired result, but there's an expectation. The expectation should be I'm going to carry out the process to a T, right? I'm going to carry out that process to an absolute T, to perfection. And I'm going to perfect waking up. Like I said, in my case, it's waking up and meditating at 5:45. I'm going to perfect that, right? I'm going to perfect waking up and then leaving and then going at 6 in the morning to work out. These are things I'm going to perfect, right? And if the goal is to bench press 300 pounds, sometimes you get there, sometimes you don't. But one thing I'm not going to do is shortchange this process. I'm going to do my push-ups every day. I'm going to hit that gym every day. I'm going to beast it out, right? I'm not going to be held back from a process standpoint. There's many things in life that stop results from happening on a consistent basis. Nothing, damn near nothing, right, can stop that process of what you want to do, particularly things you can control. And that's an important thing, is figuring out things you can control. there's nothing wrong with having high expectations. I have them, right? I have amazing expectations. And I remember like being 19 and 20 and being in middle, high school and all that. And, like I said, being 16, 17, 18. And these expectations were just, they were like plagues, right? They were depressing, right? Because if you teach someone the struggle, if you see someone and you tell them what they have to face, and you do not give them the sense of hope or teach them the weakness of what they are facing or how they can beat it, all you are doing is teaching fear. Imagine this scenario. It's 1987, 1988. And I put you in a ring with Mike Tyson. And all I do is tell you, you're facing the baddest man on the planet. It's the hardest hitting heavyweight of all time. He only goes for knockouts. He does not want you to get out of this first round. He's coming to break every bone in your body. And he's coming to, as he would say, put his fist through your skull. And I don't teach you any aspects of him. I don't say, well, Mike likes to lean here. He likes to start his punches. He jabs like this, and typically if he's jabbing like that, it's going to lead to this. And if he's, he likes to do the combinations of hitting the body, one to the body and one to the head. And I don't tell you anything. All I'm doing is just making you scared of this guy, right? You're just like, well, this is scary, But when you prepare people, when you tell people that there is a chance, right? Not just from like a lying standpoint, just like, oh, guys, hey, you can do anything you want to do, but no, in the sense of we're going to study, right? We're going to make sure you get a training camp, I get a training camp, and we're going to make sure we study. We're going to watch tape. We're going to get in shape. We're going to do everything it takes. We're going to get in mental shape. We're going to get physically ready and emotionally ready for what we're going to have to deal with, because make no mistake about it, it will be hell if we want to win, but we're going to win anyway. And those are the type of things that you have to think about when you're thinking about expectations for yourself. So like I said, for this episode, I wanted to talk about expectations. And I wanted to equate that to sports. Because like I said, to me, sports is that it's easy to define, right? Either you win or you lose. Or sometimes you're Canelo and Triple G and you get a draw, right? Or sometimes you're Lennox Lewis in Holyfield and you get a draw, which was that was crazy. Or it's the NFL and you get a draw. But the point is there's only one MVP. And every other player who doesn't win it that season is not the MVP. There's only one NBA champion. And every team that doesn't win is a loser, right? And that is that simple concept of the fans. You see that with LeBron. People say, how can he think he's this good in a team sport when he's 3-6 in the finals? And what does that mean, right? What does the 3-6 in the finals mean? And understand, even not even to really go into it, because that might be another podcast, but the whole Jordan versus LeBron debate is an interesting debate, right? Not just because of who you think is better, but it's an interesting debate because of the preference. When you're talking about Jordan and you're talking about LeBron, those guys are really good, right? They're really good. And you really can go wrong with neither. But there's a preference, right? And Jordan changed the standard, the expectation of what it meant to be a star perimeter player in this game. That if you're going to be the best player on your team, you need to have a killer, quote unquote, killer instinct, right? And you need to average 30, and you need to be this, and this is what that means, and this is what that means. And with LeBron, his style plays a little different. And the thing about when you're trying to define who you think is the best, a lot of times it's going to boil down to your preferences. You can pull stats. You can throw a lot of stats out and say, this is what I think this is going to be. This is what I think this is going to be. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of it's a preference. If you prefer a guy who you feel is a more natural scorer, a guy who's not necessarily a facilitator, but a guy who's going to draw a lot of contact with the defense and all of those things, you may prefer Michael Jordan. But if you prefer a guy who can do it all, who's the more all-around player, then maybe you prefer LeBron in terms of the facilitator aspect. I want a guy who passes the ball in this situation, that situation. Then it's a preference, right? And I think a lot of times when you don't get the desired results, Now that's when those things we start nitpicking, and we start saying, well, LeBron's not good because, and every player has this, every person has this, in almost any aspect, that, I wouldn't have LeBron because he doesn't have the killer instinct. And you might say that because he may pass the ball to, I don't know, Kuzma for open three, and Kuzma misses the three, and then you say, see, Jordan would have took the shot. And then conversely, if Kobe does that or if Jordan does that, you say, and they take the shot and they brick it, and it's like 3 people on them, you say, well, see, LeBron would have passed that and found the right guy. So you can always play nitpick, right, and with these different things. But the main thing, that's really about it, though. But the main thing I wanted to talk about for this episode is expectation, how to place expectation on yourself, which is, like I said, to me, it is following that process. That is the expectation. The expectation is not just the result. It's not, I want to climb this mountain. It's, only thing I can expect. Like there's a whole bunch of things that can stop me from climbing it, right? The rocks can fall apart, can give way, and my shoe, I can slip, all of these things. But the expectation that I'm going to place on myself is I'm going to put in the right preparation, right? I'm going to put in the right amount of time. I'm going to do my due diligence in terms of the research it takes to climb this mountain. And that is the process. That is the expectation, in my opinion, that you should fall in love with. The expectation of result is a tough one, because even for like a Kobe, I mean, if we're just basing the expectation of I want to make every shot or what the goal is, I mean, Kobe's missed more shots than he's made, but he's still a legendary basketball player, right? So if you're going to attempt greatness, you're going to fail more times than succeed. All greatness is a few moments of succeeding, right? It's that consistency when no one's watching it, and it's just a few moments. It's a few moments of, I got this right, boom, I got this right, you know what I mean? And that's all it is. It's just, I got these few moments correct. I got these moments down pat, even though I failed all the way up to this point, man. I was falling and scraping my knees to get to this point. And all it took was a few little moments of, here we go. You know what I mean? And that's all it takes at times, guys. And, that's really all it is, man, for this episode but let me know what you want to talk about. Let me know, like I said, I want to do interviews in the future. I want to interview different people. I'm just for the sake of throwing it out here, of my interest. I'm a huge wrestling fan, not necessarily now, but I know a lot about wrestling. So I plan on getting some people in that field if I can one day. I'm huge into academics. I want to get professors on here. I want to get, some of my friends on here, some of my people on here, man, and hopefully we can enlighten, and maybe I can get some of you guys in the future and figure out a way to collab in some way. I really want to make this as educational, as informal, as entertaining, and all of these different things that we think about. I want to make them all of that and more, right? I want these things to affect culture. I want it to hit hard. I want it to hit it home. And that is really all I have to say, man, for this episode. So until then, man, stay real, stay humble, but more importantly, stay tuned.